It has been 1 month since Apple released the iPad Air, and I have been using this as my primary iPad for the whole month, and since my initial review of this device, I have learned even more about what I like about this device and what I don't like about it. So, if you're trying to decide between any iPad right now, I think this longer term review might be useful because you may find out whether or not this iPad is right for you, or if any iPad is. Now, one thing I really appreciate after using the iPad Air for a month is the form factor. Listen, there are a lot of iPads out there right now with different designs and different form factors. I mean, the iPad range is so diverse, from the regular 10.2-inch iPad to the small iPad mini to the mid-size iPad Pro and the iPad Air and of course the big boy 12.9-inch iPad Pro. Now, I've been using pretty much all of these iPad models on and off, and while each iPad certainly has its advantages, I find myself always returning primarily to the iPad Air or 11-inch iPad Pro form factor. It really is the Goldilocks moment of where the iPad mini is too small to use for everything. The 12.9-inch has an amazing display and so much screen real estate, but when you want to use it as a tablet, it's a little too unwieldy. But the iPad Air is the perfect compromise for using this as both a tablet device and as a laptop alternative. I think it really excels when kicking back in a chair, reading websites, books, manga, and of course watching plenty of YouTube videos. And it also is highly complemented by buying the optional Magic Keyboard, turning this into the smallest and lightest weight laptop-like device that Apple sells. I've been pretty amazed at the graphics and how smooth the gameplay is on these newer iPads. If Apple could develop a first-party controller for the iPhone and iPad, I think they could have a pretty compelling gaming platform for hardcore gamers. But mostly I've been using my iPad for consuming, so mostly in tablet mode, which the Air is lightweight and more comfortable to hold than my bigger 12.9-inch iPad Pro. Also, a bonus point to the fun colors that this new iPad Air gets. I've really been enjoying the new blue color. It makes me want to pick it up and use it a lot more just because of how it looks. And I want to see some of these new colors make their way to the entire iPad lineup. Also, I heard some complaints from other users about the iPad Air build quality, saying that it creaks, but I haven't noticed this on my model. Build quality seems to be just as good as the previous iPad Air, which I've never had any problems with. Other things I like about the Air is that it's now on par with the iPad Pro in terms of performance, because they both have the same exact M1 chip. In previous years, I would always feel the sway to the Pro models because I wanted to use the most powerful hardware that these devices offered. So now that I can use a mid-range iPad, I no longer feel like I am missing out on performance by stepping down to the Air. And the iPad Air is a very snappy device with that M1 chip, even though it lacks the 120Hz ProMotion display that is on the Pro models. And I feel like it's more responsive and a smoother experience than even the iPad mini, which sports that A15 chip. Granted, the M1 may have more power than I will ever take advantage of using on this iPad, but if you're an iPad power user who wants to use the iPad for video editing, photo editing, and drawing, while all of those programs can be intensive, especially depending on how many layers you utilize at once, so the extra power that the M1 gives you could eliminate some bottlenecks that you are currently facing if you are using an older iPad model, especially with the memory on the M1. It's a big step up from the previous iPad Air, which only featured 4 GB of memory. The M1 iPad Air doubles that to 8 GB of memory, so not only is this great for those pro apps, but it's also a nice improvement even for general use, where your apps stay open longer in the background, and there's just general less refreshing of apps overall, even if you don't pick up the iPad for hours or even sometimes days. Okay, we talked about what's the same, but what about what's different? Because I feel like the iPad Air is just a stripped down version of the 11-inch iPad Pro. And I feel like the best way that I can help you decide between this iPad and the others in the lineup is to talk about some of those cut features and if they bother me. I think one big one is the display. The display on the Air is 100 nits less bright than the 11-inch model, has a slightly smaller 10.9-inch screen, and does not feature the fast 120Hz ProMotion display. Now, while I already alluded to the fact that the Air feels snappy even without the 120Hz display, there is a loss of to how smooth animations look and how responsive the operating system can feel with 120Hz enabled. It's personally not a big deal to me. and I quickly adapt to the device's lower refresh rate. But if you're coming from an iPad with 120 Hz, like an older iPad Pro, it may be something that you can unsee. The display quality itself is still good though. The LCD display is color accurate, bright, and has really good viewing angles with no blooming. However, I wish the black levels were deeper. I'm so used to OLED on my iPhone and mini LED displays on the new 12.9-inch iPad Pro, and while I acknowledge that we probably shouldn't have a mini LED device that would be $600, the gap between display quality is growing between Apple's lower-end devices and their premium offerings. So this is one area where I really feel like I'm missing out on the iPad Air by not using my bigger iPad Pro, and I just really wish it had those deeper black levels. I also miss the speakers on my iPad Pro. They just provide an overall richer and fuller sound experience than the stereo pair found on the iPad Air. Other changes I don't really miss too much. Having a regular USB-C port instead of a Thunderbolt port is really not a big deal to me because personally I don't really ever transfer files over from my iPad to external storage or vice versa, and the USB-C port supports connections to new external displays like Apple Studio Display, so the off chance that I want to connect this to an external monitor, I have that ability to do that, and I'm not really missing out with the USB-C port not having Thunderbolt. More importantly, all of the Pro accessories that I love on the iPad Pro also work on the iPad Air. The combination of this product with the white keyboard case looks so sharp, and without a new 11-inch Air or 12-inch Mac replacement, this is the ultimate portable laptop-like device to bring with you to your next coffee shop study session. The Apple Pencil 2 is also great for jotting down a few notes with the new Quick Note feature. And honestly, I've always been very impressed on what real artists can do when given an iPad with an Apple Pencil. It's an amazingly creative device for those users. Here's the real problem though, and this may be a bit different from most of my reviews because while I do like to focus on individual products themselves, I have to be honest and say, I'm not using my iPad that much anymore. I've just been so happy recently with Apple's Apple Silicon Macs that a lot of the tasks that I used to designate to my iPad because they were faster have just gone back full swing into the Mac. I know this is the kind of topic that won't go away, the constant battle between, the Mac versus the iPad, and it's something I've been struggling a lot with as I keep trying to fit the iPad into my life. And I used to be so much of a more avid iPad user that it kind of makes me sad how much more I prefer the Mac. And I know that's not everyone, some people prefer the iPad, but for me, I really feel like I need the software to catch up. I think it's easier to forgive these limitations on the iPad Air because it's a lower cost device, and I maintain that the only major problem with the new hardware on the iPad Air is the low 64 gigabytes of starting storage, which I think is just way too small to be on a device this capable. But with that being said, when you look at the hardware in this device with its $599 price point, I don't think there's anything that can compete with it in the entire market from a hardware perspective. It's just packed with so much power and so much capabilities that I really love that Apple was able to bring the M1 into a device at this price point. But for me, the software keeps this from being a primary device. And in recent years, it has, to me, really strayed away from being both a primary device and being a third device that sits in between the iPhone and the Mac. Honestly, I just don't know where the iPad really fits in anymore, and I think that's a big identity crisis that needs to be solved sooner rather than later. So don't be fooled. Even though this is a great value with the M1 chip, this is still being held back by iPadOS, and if you're a user that can make this work for you, that's great, but if you couldn't before, because of software, the M1 is not going to save this device. At least right now. So after 1 month of use, do I recommend the iPad Air? Yes, I still do, even though I have my issues with it. I think for the money, it's hard to beat if you can make 64 gigabytes of storage work for you, and arguably, a $599 iPad could provide a way better experience than any laptop in its price range, but by the time you start adding additional accessories like the Magic Keyboard, it might be smarter to go for something like the MacBook Air if you want a traditional laptop experience. All right, everyone, hopefully you found this video helpful. If you did, leave me a like and don't forget to subscribe. And if you want any of the products I talked about in this video, make sure you check out some of the affiliate links in the description below. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and hopefully I will see you all in the next video. Take care, everyone.